and welcome to another pen video from me, Penultimate Dave. Hello and welcome to another inks comparison video. And this is my favourite Shimmer inks comparison number 2. So I think with that, let's swap up some of these inks. So I get a lot of questions on how I do these ink videos. So I decided I would add this to the front of each of the ink videos. I put links in the description, but I know some of you watch this on TVs or mobile devices, so you don't get to see this. So first off, the paper is the number one question I get asked. What paper do I use for these ink comparison videos? So this is the original Tomoe River. This is 52 GSM, and it is the white, not the cream, the white. Where possible, I try to go for the white because the cream can actually change the color of the ink just a little bit. So this is Tomoe River 52 GSM in the white. A lot of people get confused as well because I have what looks to be a grid on this page, and it's actually an Oxford Optik pad. These are the pads that I actually use when I'm writing my writing samples for pen reviews or in my currently ink. So they have these little squares up here. I just use that because it's a good guide for me. When I put this very thin sheet of Tomoe River over, I can actually see squares, so it helps me write a little bit sort of straight on the page. Not always, but sometimes it does. The other thing that I also have is I have a bottle of water, plain water, and I dip my nib in here. So for consistency, I use the same fountain pen, or I guess it's not a fountain pen, it's using a fountain pen nib though. This is a 3D printed pen from William Shakour in the UK. So he prints this material 3D, and it has a number 8 size Bock nib which I can unscrew, and you can see there. So it is just a dip pen holder for a number 8 size Bock nib, and the idea is I want to have consistency with the writing sample. So I use this, I dip it in the ink, I write, and then I will dip it in here and I will rinse the nib off several times and I will dry it, and then at that point I will then go on to do the next ink swatch and the next writing sample. So there you have it. That's how I do my ink swatches. So I just wanted to show you that here. Now on to the ink comparison video. So the first ink we've got here is a Diamine Shimmertastic ink, and this is called Inferno Orange, and you can see the amount of shimmer that is in that bottle. So I'll shake up that bottle just to disperse the shimmer particles into the ink and see if we can get some of that on the paper. So we'll do an ink swatch here. And this is a very bright orange ink, and it actually reminds me a little bit of Diamine Blaze Orange, but it's a little bit, goes a little bit more drier than Blaze Orange, I would say. We'll do a second pass over the top half just to show the difference between a wet or broad or dry or a narrow writing nib. So this is Diamine Shimmertastic and it's Inferno Orange. But this is quite a nice orange ink with some sort of more goldish shimmer in that ink. The next ink here is a Dominant Industry ink, and this is Fairy Forest, and again you can see there's a lot of shimmer there. So we'll do an ink swatch, and you can see that this is a little bit of a tealy turquoisey coloured ink. But again, it's one of these lighter inks from Dominant Industry. They seem to do a lot of these lighter inks. So we'll do a second pass over the top half just to try and show the difference between a wet or broad or a dry or a narrow writing nib. And this is Dominant Industry and it's Fairy Forest. But I do like how wetter or broader nibs write with that ink. It writes a lot better. The next ink is a Dominant Industries ink, and this is simply called Dawn. But again, you can see there's some shimmer going on there in that bottle, so I'll shake that up. So we'll do an ink swatch here. Now, again, this is one of those lighter pale inks, so one that you probably need to put it in a wet or a broad nib. We'll do a second pass as well, because it is a very faint ink, and you can see the difference between a wet or broad or dry or a narrow writing nib. So this is Dominant Industry. And it's simply called Dawn. You can see there that the writing sample on this pen is a nib is a lot darker. The next ink here, again, is another Dominant Industry, but it's called Snowfields. And you'll see here, it's got a lot of silver shimmer ink. So we'll do an ink swatch here. And again, this is a very, very light ink with a silver shimmer. So it's going to be interesting. But this is an ink that I have liked in the past. So we'll do a second pass over the top half, just show the difference between a wet or broad or a dry or a narrow writing nib. So this is Dominant Industries. And it's called Snowfield. And you can see already that it's actually looking quite nice in that writing sample. But it is a very faint ink, so you really do need a wet or a broad nib for this ink. The next ink here is Diamine Shimmertastic, and it's Blue Lightning. Now this is an ink that I've used a lot of. This is a very nice blue, and I do like the shimmer in it as well. So this is an ink. I've never actually had to go through more than one bottle of shimmer ink. At the moment, I will say. So we'll do a second pass over the top half, just to show the difference between a wet or broad or dry or narrow writing nib. And I was just going to say, I have never gone through a single bottle of shimmer ink because I don't use it that much compared to regular ink. However, there are smaller bottles of the Whiskey Gold ink that I really do like, and I bought 5 bottles of. So I think it's a 30ml bottle, I believe. So yeah, it's going to be one that I do go through quite quickly. But up until now, I haven't actually gone through a single bottle of shimmer. I've not emptied it at all. So this is Diamine Shimmertastic, and it's Blue Lightning. But that for me is actually quite a nice coloured ink. And then the last ink here on this inks comparison video is Diamine Cobalt Jazz, which is a lot darker blue, and you've got a bit of mix of shimmer there. So we'll take a look at this. I'll shake the bottle up, see if I can disperse the shimmer into the ink a little bit more. So we'll do an ink swatch, and as you can see, this is a cobalt blue, so it's a much deeper blue. Maybe a bit more darker, but certainly more deeper, I would say. We'll do a second pass over the top half, so you can see the difference between a wet or broad or a dry or a narrow writing nib. So this is Diamine Shimmertastic, and it's called Cobalt Jazz. I think let's now take a look at these inks now that they have dried. So the first ink here is Diamine Shimmertastic Inferno Orange. And I'd have to say that this is almost one of my all-time favourite shimmer inks. It's a very bright, vibrant orange, a little bit like Diamine Blaze Orange, although it does go on a little bit drier, I would say. Can you see the difference between a wet or broad or a dry or a narrow writing nib? You definitely can. Is there shading going on in the pulled area? There's definitely some shading. There isn't any sheen, but I wouldn't be expecting sheen. But there is shimmer, clearly, because this is a shimmer ink. And you can see that there, how that ink shimmers. And also, if you look at the writing sample there, that shimmers massively as well. So this really is a beautiful orange ink with some shimmer particles or particulate in that ink. The next ink is a Dominant Industry ink, and it's called Fairy Forest. So this is a little bit more of a tealy, turquoisey coloured ink. Can you see the difference between a wet or broad or dry or a narrow writing nib? You definitely can. Can you see the difference? Can you see any shading going on there? There is definitely shading in that pulled area. Is there sheen going on? It's trying to sheen around the edges of that pulled area. But again, it's really not sheening. So the majority, I find, of shimmer inks do not sheen. It's fairly rare, unless the ink has been a sheening ink that somebody has added shimmer ink or particles to it. Then at that point, it will sheen and shimmer at the same time. So I think let's bring this up a little bit closer, and you'll see this here. There is a lot of shimmer particles on that ink there. And then also on that writing sample as well, you'll see a lot of shimmer particles. So if you like a green, a turquoisey coloured ink, a light green, turquoisey or tealy ink with some shimmer, this might be the ink for you. The next ink is Dominant Industry Dawn. And I think this is a good name for the ink, honestly. Can you see the difference between a wet or broad or dry or a narrow writing nib? You definitely can. Can you see any shading going on in the pulled area? There's not a lot. There's a little bit here, but really not a lot. And I'll bring this up closer. You can see that there. There's a little bit around here, and there, but nothing much. Is there any sheen? There isn't. Is there any shimmer particles? Yes, there's a lot of shimmer particles there. And you can also see it on that writing sample as well. That's quite shimmery as well. The next ink here is Dominant Industry Snowfield. Now, this really is a snow-like ink. I think it's a good name for this ink. Can you see the difference between a wet or broad or dry or a narrow writing nib? You definitely can. You really would not want to put this in a narrow, like an extra fine or a fine nib, or even a dry writing nib, because you're really not going to see this. It almost disappears. I guess a little bit like snow, that you see varying sort of brightnesses of snow. Is there any pooling going on or shading? There's a little bit, but again, you're not going to see much here. I'll bring this closer to the camera. Is there any shimmer? Yes, you can see shimmer here. It's very subtle, but when you look at the writing sample, the dominant part is still a bit wet, but you can see it there in the industry and the Snowfield there. So it's got quite a bit of shimmer in it, but it is a light ink, and this is a very wet and broad nib. So just bear that in mind. If you think you like this ink, you're going to have to put it in a wet or broad nib. One of my all-time favourite inks is Diamine Shimmertastic Blue Lightning. I like turquoise coloured inks or cerulean blues. This has a really nice colour to it. Can you see the difference between a wet or broad or dry or a narrow writing nib? You definitely can here. Is there any shading? Yes, there's shading in the pulled areas here. Is there sheen? There's some sheen around the edges of the pulled area, but it's really not being able to sheen too much. Is there any shimmer? Yeah, of course there is, because it is a shimmer ink, and you can see that silver shimmer there. And if you look at the writing sample, there is a lot of shimmer on that writing sample. So that is a very beautiful shimmer ink that I do like a lot. And then the final ink here is Diamine Shimmertastic Cobalt Jazz. And this was one that I have liked a lot, but I've not used as much as Blue Lightning, purely because it's a darker blue and I'm not that into darker blue inks. But it's still a favourite of mine. Can you see the difference between a wet or broad or a dry or a no writing nib? You can definitely see a little bit of a difference. Not as much as, say, Blue Lightning. Can you see any shading going on in the pooled area? There's definitely some shading going on. Now, is there any sheen? Yes, there is. Around the edges here, you can see some red sheen going on around that pooled area there. Is there any shimmer? Yes, definitely shimmer. There's some gold, and I want to say silver shimmer. I think it's a mix of two in there. And you can also see that on the writing sample as well. So there's a nice load of shimmer on that ink. So if you like a darker blue ink and you want some shimmer on it, then that definitely is going to be one to look at. So there you have it. That's my favourite Shimmer inks comparison number 2 video. If there are any of these inks that you like, do let me know in the comments below. Likewise, if there are any other inks that you would like me to check out, do let me know in the comments below. So that's my favourite Shimmer inks comparison number 2 video. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next pen video. Bye bye.